All right, so we'll say good morning. Let's begin. So today's daf is Daf Yodalit. We're going to start from the bottom of Yud Gimel Amud Beis. So Ben Achia, 4 lines are from the bottom. So remember again, Ben Achia, the Mishnah said, was in charge of the Kohanim's stomach disorders. Ben Achia Cholim Ayim. Says the Gemara, why did the Kohen suffer from such stomach disorders? So the Gemara says, remember, the Kohanim had to walk barefoot on the floor of the Beis Hamikdash. And they would eat meat. Vishosin mayim, and they would drink water. They ultimately would come to have these stomach disorders. So also, interestingly enough, what the Tikkun Charatin points out is that the coldness of the floor, obviously without shoes, is problematic. Coupled with the fact that normally when eating large quantities of meat, the one thing that's exceptionally healthy, times have changed a little bit, one thing that's exceptionally healthy with that is to drink large quantities of wine. But because, again, you can't drink wine when you are in the Beis Hamikdash, Kohanim can't drink while on duty. So therefore, the large quantities of meat, the fact that they were chilled by the floor, the absence of wine, caused them to have stomach issues. And therefore, what did Ben Achia do? V'haviyada haydin chamar tov l'me'aya, v'haydin chamar sama l'me'aya. And Ben Achia knew which wines were helpful for the stomach, literally for the bowels. Which wine was helpful for the bowels and which wine was detrimental for the bowels. Goes on. Nuchunya chofer sichin. Nuchunya was the one who dug ditches. So remember again, as we pointed out yesterday, this digging of the ditches over here refers to this idea that he would dig wells. He would dig wells, and particularly because of the fact that when they had the regalim, when they had the pilgrimage festivals, there had to be multiple water sources. So Nechunya was the ditch digger. Shayuchofer sichin uma'aros. He was a person who dug pits. Ma'aros literally means caves, but these are all different types of wells. V'havayada, top of Yodalit, and he knew Hai din cave mukurar maya v'hai din cave isbe sharvuve. He knew which stones had the ability to cool down water, and which stones were filled with heat. Va'ad heichon sharvuvuse matcha, and he also knew that if he discovered like a hot pocket, he knew how deep the heat extended. So, I mean, I guess when digging a well, you have to know exactly what it is that you're digging for. So he had exceptional proficiency in digging these wells. He goes on, Amar Rabbi Eliezer, and I've also, now the Gemara says something amazing. Rabbi Eliezer says, Umeis beno bitsama, that the son of Nechunya died of thirst. And also what the Gemara notes is the just incredible tragic irony in that here Nechunya spends his life digging wells for others, and yet his son, the Gemara doesn't tell us what circumstances, but that his son died of thirst. Now, the Tikkun Charatin has an interesting explanation here. He writes, you see where it says on the right, Tikkun Charatin is on the right-hand side, where it says, Umeis bino bitsama. See, he writes over here, Ki b'mida sha'adam zahir ba ma'od, imhu pogim kitsas bazeh ne'enash alav biyoser. So Tikkun Charatin suggests that when a person is very meticulous with something, and then he is lax with that very thing, even just a little bit, ultimately he's held accountable for that laxity much more than someone else. Meaning that when you are known to be proficient with something and you don't live up to the expectations in that one thing, you are held accountable to a higher degree than someone else who is not as meticulous with that very thing. So if you skip to the last 3 lines of that Tikkun Charatin, he says, V'hachanami she'ochiz b'midah tova zula hotzimayim l'rabim. So since Nechunya was very careful to always provide water sources for the public, ukishe'ira lo delo nishar kima deboi ne'enash pazeha inyan gufei. And then when it turns out that he was not careful, so the Gemara doesn't tell us, but something happened. Something happened that Nechunya was not careful with digging the wells, and therefore, as a result, he was held responsible for that. And the Gemara understands that the midah kineged midah is that his own child Chas Shalom died because of thirst. Amar Rabbi Chanina. Now that the Gemara began this topic of the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu deals very strongly and very strictly with certain individuals who are meticulous with mitzvos, the Gemara opens this door. Rabbi Chanina, Amar Rabbi Chanina, man de Amar Rachmana Vatran, Vatron b'nei me'uye. Both say literally translated, anyone who says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a vatron. Now, what does vatron mean? If you look at the Tiklin Charatin, he says, mevater ala averos delo ichpaslei. Anyone who says that God doesn't care. Also remember, there's an interesting idea that HaKadosh Baruch Hu we know is a forgiving Father. But, sometimes we confuse that with thinking that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is just going to look the other way with everything. So ever thinks that God just looks the other way with everything. Literally, Yevatru b'nei me'uye means his insides should spill out, which is a nice way of Chazal saying, politely, you're wrong. Right? Meaning that whoever thinks that HaKadosh Baruch Hu just looks the other way when we do think negative things, it's absolutely not true. We're held accountable for everything. There's tshuva, there's the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks at our actions in a context, but at the end of the day, there's absolute responsibility for everything we do, and God does not look the other way for anything. Ella ma'arich ruchei, rather HaKadosh Baruch Hu is exceptionally patient, the gave didei, but ultimately, he collects that which is due to him. So, what it means is that we know that if a person thinks that they're going to do an aver and a lightning bolt is going to come out and strike them, that's certainly not going to happen. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is patient. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives a person time to be able to go ahead and fix their misdeeds, but at the end of the day, if I don't correct my ways, there will be a divine collection. Amar Rabacha says, Ksiv, Usivivav nisara me'od. So also here the Gemara quotes the pasuk from Tehillim, literally sivivav, and all around it there were very turbulent circumstances. So also the Gemara says, now it's interesting that the word nisara is the word sa'ara, which means storm. Now normally that word is written with a samach. Here it's written with a sin. So the Gemara says, what do you see from here? Medaktek imohen kichut hasa'ara. What do you see from here? That HaKadosh Baruch Hu is as exacting with the tzaddikim like a hair's breadth. Like a hair's breadth. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has very high... Remember, we know this concept, I'll say that the stronger you are, the holier you are, the closer you are, the more HaKadosh Baruch Hu is medaktik, the more God is meticulous with what you do and how you do it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu holds the tzaddik to a higher level. Amar Rabbi Yossi, Lo mitamazeh. Rabbi Yossi says, no, I agree with the principle you're espousing, but I disagree with the source. Ela min madichsev v'norahu al kol sevivav. Rather, I think it's from the following pasuk. Also in Tehillim, v'norahu, God is great, or God is awesome on all of his surroundings. So Rabbi Yossi darshans, Mora'a ala krovim, yosra min ha'rechokim. That the awesomeness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is apparent on those who are closer more than those who are further, which is again is another way of saying the same principle, which is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu sometimes flexes his divine muscle on those who are closer to him more than those who are further. Rabbi Chagai b'shem Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman, Ma'aseh b'chassid echad sheyichofer boros asichin. There was a story once about a particular chassid, a particular pious individual. I will say, Bepashtos, this is not Nechunya. This is not Nechunya. This is someone else, another pious individual who also made it his point to go ahead and dig wells La'ovrim v'shavin, for those who would travel the road. So we'll say, obviously, a person who does this without compensation, does it for chesed for others, and for people that he doesn't even know. So obviously, an incredible Baal chesed. Pam achaz haisa bita overes lihinase. One time his daughter was traveling to her wedding, v'shatfa nahar, and she was swept away by the river. Swept away by the river. V'haven kol ama alalin legabe baon menachamte v'lo kibel eluye menachemta. So we'll say, and everyone came to try to console this chassid, but he would not be consoled. We'll say, obviously, again, the pain over here is compounded by the fact that she died through water. Right here, this man spent his life doing chesed through water, and his own daughter was taken away on her wedding day through water. All Rabbi Pinchas ben Yoir legabe ba'i menachamte. So what happens? Pinchas ben Yoir. Remember Pinchas ben Yoir? We read about his donkey yesterday. So Rabbi Pinchas ben Yoir comes in to go out and console this individual. V'lo kibel ailuye menachemta. But the man was inconsolable. Amar Lun. So Pinchas ben Yoir said, Amar Lun, dinhu chasidchun. So Pinchas ben Yoir says, very interesting, was very surprised. He said, this is the man you call a chassid. I will say, what does that mean? The halacha is, at some point in time, you have to accept some level of consolation. Meaning, to accept no consolation. Now again, remember, consolation doesn't mean everything is okay. Consolation doesn't mean that you suddenly feel better, but consolation means you accept it. You accept it. This was the Gzar Din of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and it takes people different amounts of time. But Pinchas ben Yair was surprised that this man was not even receptive to the fact that this was the Gzar of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And a person has to learn how, it's difficult, but a person has to learn how to accept the Gzeros. So Amar Efsha Shahaya, and he said, listen to this. He said, Amar Lahu Rebbe, Kach v'kach chaya osa, kach v'kach irle. So he said to Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, Rebbe, you have to understand something, is that this man spent his life providing water for others, and now water took his child. Amar efshar shayim mechabed es bar b'mayim, v'mekabcho b'mayim. So Pinchas ben Yair said, it's impossible to me to believe that a man who does such chesed with water, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would punish him so terribly with water. And amazing enough, what happened afterwards is amazing. Miyad nafla havara be'ir, basa bito shel osa ha'ish. Right as they were having this conversation, so a rumor started in the city that what? That the daughter had come back to the city. The daughter made her, she was alive, she made her back to the city. Is the amri besuchsa is aris. So some say that what happened is that when she was swept downstream, she was able to grab onto a branch and was able to go ahead and save herself. The amri malach yarad kedemusray Pinchas ben Yair v'etzila. Others say a malach in the image of Rav Pinchas ben Yair came and ultimately saved her. Okay, beautiful story. Givini Karus. So remember again, Givini was the announcer. He was the crier. Shahaya Machar the Beis Hamikdash. He used to make the announcements in the Beis Hamikdash. And what announcements would he make? Mahaya Omer, Imdu Kohanim la'avoda. Kohanim, get up. It's time to do the avoda. Uleviim leduchanan, and Leviim, get ready for your shira. The Yisrael ma'amadan. I will say again, we've had this concept. We actually learned about this in Brachos, that there were ma'amados. Ma'amados means there were rotations of. Since communal offerings represent the entire klal, anytime a carbon is going to be valid, there has to be, the owners have to be present. So who are the owners of the communal offerings? Klal Yisrael. So they had shifts of Yisraelim always present in the Beis Hamikdash, who were there to represent the collective. So he would tell and again the Gemara discusses what they would do in their ma'amados. Agrippas HaMelech Shama Kolo Ad Ches Parsal. So also I say Agrippas, the king. Remember, Agrippas was one of the Herodian kings. So Agrippas, Machlokes if he was Jewish or not. But one thing is clear, which was he was a very good man. He was very good to the Jewish people. So Agrippas once heard Gavini 8 parsaos away. So we'll say it's a very strong voice. And Agrippas gave Gavini many gifts. He was so impressed by his talents that he rewarded him richly. Ben Gevra on the Ilas Sharim. Ben Gevra was in charge of closing the gates. Tirgame Rav Kumi de Beis Rabbi Shila. Kra Gavra. Achriz Kruza. So we'll say the Gemara over here is quoting the following idea. The Gemara is talking about the Meseches Yuma. The Gemara says that by the time Kriyas HaGever came along in the morning, they were already doing the Kohanim were already up. So there's discussion as to what Kriyas HaGever actually means. So some say Achris Kruza. So some would say Kriyas HaGever means when the crier would announce. It refers to a person that, like we just said before, that the person would announce time to go ahead and get up. Amar Le, Amar Krat Tarnagola. Others say that Krus HaGever actually means the crow of the rooster. Amar Le v'hataninan ben Gever. But we have over here, it says Ben Gever would open the gates first thing. Could it be that Ben Gever is a rooster? We'll say, so what the Gemara is saying over here is that Lemaisa, from this Gemara it becomes clear that the Gemara Meseches Yuma that speaks about the fact that the gates were opened at Kriyas HaGever doesn't refer to the crow of the rooster, rather means at the time when the person announced. So what would happen is Gavini would announce, it's time to get up, and Ben Gevra would then go ahead and open up the gates. Okay. Ben Bavi ala Pakia. So Ben Bavi was in charge of the wicks. Shahaya mizayeg pesilos. He would adjust the wicks in the Beis Hamikdash. Rabbi Yossi a'al kufra. So we'll see. Rabbi Yossi once had to go to Kufra. So Rabbi Yossi had to go out of town to another city to Kufra. Bo'o memanye alayhun parnosim. So we'll say Rabbi Yossi, because Rabbi Yossi administered many of the town's affairs, now that he was leaving, so he had to appoint people to take care of things in his absence. No one wanted to assume responsibility. So I'll say it's very interesting. Take a look at the Tiklin Charatin. He says over here, Actually, let's read one more line. Velo kiblon minhon. But no one wanted to take responsibility. Says Teklin Chadet, Velo kiblon minhon, mishum usneas harabonos. So we'll say, so the Teklin Chadet gives a couple of possibilities. One possibility is, because the Mishnah says you should despise positions of leadership. Despise positions of leadership for a whole variety of reasons. We've actually seen this concept before. For Talmidei Chachamim, the reason why they despise leadership is because person is pulled in all different directions and a person doesn't have time for their own spiritual growth. Also because sometimes a person has to deal with all different kinds of people who don't necessarily exert the right kind of influence on the individual. So one possibility is, even though Rabbi Yossi says, listen, I need someone to help out, no one wants to assume this responsibility. Inami or the other possibility is sometimes the greatest danger of authority is misuse of that authority. Sometimes when a person is vested with incredible responsibility, a person has to make sure to use that power responsibly. In any event, they didn't want to nobody wanted to pick up the slack when Rabbi Yossi was gone. A'av Amar Kumein, he came up and he said to them, A'av Amar Kumein, Ben Bavi ala Pakia. So Rabbi said, listen, Ben Bavi was in charge of the wicks in the Beis HaMikdash. Uma imzeh shenismana ala psilos zochali himanis im gedoli hadar. Atem shanismanin achayin nefashos lakol shekein. So Rabbi Yossi said to them, can you imagine this? If Ben Pakia, what did Ben Pakia do? He arranged the wicks. But if arranging the wicks in the Beis HaMikdash allows you to be mentioned in the Mishnah with the other Gedoli Hadar, then imagine the schus that you have when you run the affairs of the city and you're literally taking care and enhancing the lives of people. So it's an amazing thing. Doing things for the klal is always a great suchos. Whether it's delivering, whether it's arranging wicks, or whether it's taking care of the needs of the tzibur. But he's saying, if you could imagine, if the schus involved with arranging the wicks is so great, then imagine when you actually have the privilege to be involved in substantive matters of the klal, what kind of privilege that is. Ben Arza alat salsal. Ben Arza was in charge of the symbols. Ki hadid taninan. Tamon. This is what we learned. Heinif hasgan b'sudar. Boss is actually very interesting. When the Kohen Gadol bent down to offer the Nisachim, this is about the carbon atamid. So after the carbon atamid was offered, the Kohen Gadol would bend down and he would go ahead and offer the Nisachim. So what happens? The skan, the assistant Kohen Gadol, would wave, literally b'sudarin would wave a flag or would wave a cloak. Vehekish ben arza alat salsal. Ben arza would crash the cymbals together, and what would happen? Then the Levitic choir would start. Hugros ben Levi alashir. Hugros ben Levi was in charge of the Levitic choir. Amar Reb Acha ni'ima yisera hayo yodea. So apparently Hugros had a beautiful voice, and he knew how to use it. Va'amra alav al Hugros ben Levi. They said about Hugros, shayamanim eskola bezemer, that he would go ahead and raise his voice so beautifully in song. Ukishayanoit godlo besoch piv, and when he put his thumb in his mouth, hayomotzi kama mine zemer. So whatever this means, he was able to play the thumb. What that means is somehow he was able to create sounds, I guess with his finger, with whatever it was, and it sounded like he was playing musical instruments. That's how talented he was. And his voice was so powerful that the Kohanim who were standing like right next to him were literally thrown back by his voice. The Garmu family were in charge of lechem aponim. Beis Garmu hayu became b'maaseh lechem aponim uberidiyaso. The Garmu family were expert in the baking of lechem aponim as well as the removal. And I will say, remember, the lechem aponim was baked in a mold. Now, remember, as I mentioned yesterday, the lechem aponim is very unique because its shape is exceptionally strong. The Rashi in the Torah says it's like a box with an opening and without sides. So if you can imagine for a moment, so the loaf itself had a base, then it had like two walls that extended upwards, and then it had two parts that extended like that. But the inside was hollow. So obviously, you can imagine what would normally happen if you and I tried to bake a loaf of bread. What would happen? It would just collapse into itself. But amazingly enough, the Garmu family knew how to make it. So we'll say the chap over here is they baked it. The real hard part was not the baking it. The hard part was getting it out of the mold, still in one piece. So the house of Garmu knew how to do this. But what happened? But they did not want to teach anyone else. They did not want to share this information. The Chacham got very upset about this because, again, they felt that the Garmu family was using this knowledge for their own self-aggrandizement and was holding it from the Jewish people. So what happens? Shalchu Chachamim v'heviu umnin me'Alexandria she'bekiba ma'asalechem apanim uberidiaso. Excuse me. She'bekiin b'ma'asalechem apanim uberidiaso lo hayu bekiyas. Well, so listen to this. So what happens? So the rabbis outsourced. I guess before people started outsourcing to India, right? So now again, they went to Alexandria in Egypt, and they got the best bakers in Alexandria who came and did lechem apanim. To make lechem apanim, they had no problem. What was the problem? The problem is they couldn't get it out of the mold whole. And what happens is, furthermore, the Garmu family, they would fire the oven from the inside of the oven, but they would only remove the bread from the mold outside of the oven. And as a result, the bread always remained fresh. It didn't turn moldy. But the bakers from Alexandria would go ahead and fire up the oven on the inside and would remove the dough from the mold on the inside as well. Apparently what they thought was like this: they removed the dough from the mold before it was fully baked, because that way the dough is a little bit more malleable, right? Pliable, malleable. Soft, so you can get it out. The problem is, because it was not fully baked, so spoilage set in much faster. Also, it's also very interesting because we know that, again, one of the miracles that happened in the Beis Hamikdash was that the lechem apanim remained fresh. So, okay, whatever that mitzias is. So the Gemara says, Kevan shedu chacham adavar zeh, Amru kol ma shebara HaKadosh Baruch Hu lichvodo bara, shene'emar kol pa'al Hashem lema'aneu. So also, now that this happened, the rabbis realized, okay, even the best bakers cannot replicate this process, and they realize, you know what? It's not right for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Literally, it means everything that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created, he only created for his honor. Listen, if the house of Garmu, if the Garmu family, if they're the ones who know how to do this, and they're the only ones, then you know what, they're going to have to go with them, and if they don't want to share this knowledge, so be it. What happens? Sholchu achareim v'lo ratzu lavo at shekaflu lahen scharan. So what happens now? So contract negotiations. So now the Garmu family says, no problem, you fired us, now you want to rehire us, let's talk contract. So they wouldn't come back until the Beis Hamikdash agreed to double their salary. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Chaf Dalet Hayu Notlin V'Noslan. Excuse me, I skipped. So Yud Beis Mana Hayu Notlin V'Noslan Chaf Dalet. They originally got paid 12 mana, and then they told the Beis Midrash they'd only come back for 24. Rabbi Yehuda says no, it was 24. Chaf Dalet Hayu V'Notlahen Memches. Amrulahen, so finally, okay, they paid them what they wanted. Now they came back. Amrulahen, mipnei ma'in atem rotim lelamed. So the Chazal asked, Beis Garmu, like, what's your problem? Why won't you share this information? Well, so listen to how profound this is. Amrulahen, mesoras hi bi'adenu mi'avosinu. We have a tradition from our forefathers, Shabayis hazeh asili charev, that the Beis Hamikdash is going to be destroyed. Shelo yomru achirim, shelo yilamdu achirim, v'ya'asu lifnei avoda zara shalahem b'shalahem. I will say, and what happens? You know why we don't want to give away the secret? Because if you give away the secret and the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed, inevitably, you know what will happen? It will be used for avodah zarah. Therefore, we hold the recipe close to our chest to ensure that no matter what happens to the Jewish people, ultimately, this will never be misused in an inappropriate way. And amazingly enough, the Gemara says, okay, fine. So that's why they didn't want to share. Now, I will say again, whether or not that's correct or not is a different discussion. This Gemara also actually appears in Maseches Tainis. So there the Gemara deals with it a little bit more extensively about whether or not they were right or they were wrong. But at the end of the day, it wasn't for their own self-aggrandizement. It was really because they wanted to protect the sanctity of the Beis Hamikdash. So the Gemara says, "B'dvarim halal maskirin osa l'shevach." The Chazal often praised a particular practice of the house of Garmu. What was the practice? They never had white bread in the house. Now, I will say again, understand that white bread means bread from fine flour. So they never had fine flour bread. Literally, no one ever saw fine flour bread in the hands of their children. Why? Because the boss again, Beis Karma was always very conscious that if people would see fine flour bread in the hands of the children in the household, people could assume what? That they were using lechem upon him. So this is quite amazing. So in order to ultimately be above reproach, be beyond suspicion, they only ate more inferior quality bread because they never wanted to be suspected of eating the lechem upon him. It's quite amazing. So the Gemara goes weiter. Beis Avatinas amasak Torahs. The Avatinas family was in charge of the Ketoras. Shabeis Avatinas yibikina maase pitimak Torah. So malasa ashan. So the Avatinas family were experts in two things. Number one, pitu makitoras, which means, again, putting together the various spices and herbs for kitoras, because remember, again, that is a practice in and of itself to know, which herbs, and to know, again, the right combination of them. So they knew that. And ma'ala ashan. We'll say ma'ala ashan, we will see, is actually a particular herb that was added that allowed the pillar of smoke to ascend directly upward in a pillar, as opposed to normally when you light something on fire, the smoke dissipates immediately. Ma'ala ashan was the name of an ingredient that caused the pillar to remain intact and descend upwards. So they knew the right combination for ketoras, and they also knew this particular item called ma'ala ashan. V'lo ratzu lelamed. But again, the house of Avatinas did not want to teach anyone the secret of the ketoras. So the rabbis said, you know what, forget it, we're going to go get other craftsmen. They sent out for the craftsmen of Alexandria, who were experts in the making of ketoras. But what was the problem? They knew how to make the ketoras. What didn't they know? They didn't know about the ma'ala ashan. They couldn't figure out how to get the smoke to ascend in a straight pillar. And therefore, he says, "Shal beis avatinas haisa mitameres va'ola kimakal uposa v'yoredes." For the Avatinas family, their ketores rose up in a straight column, in a straight pillar, and then once it rose up, it dissipated and fell back down. However, again, v'shal elu haisa posa miyad. But for the Alexandrian craftsmen, when they would go ahead and light the ketores on fire, the smoke would immediately dissipate. Kevan sheyadu chachamim b'davar amru kol ma shebara HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'chvodo bara shene'emar kol hanikra b'shmi l'chvodi b'rasiv. So when the rabbis realized that the Alexandrian craftsmen are not able to go ahead and replicate this, they understood that they had to go ahead and use the Avatinas family, because that would have been the greatest kavod to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So what do? Shalchu achreim, same thing. So they wanted to get the Avatinas family back into the Beis HaMikdash. V'lo ratzu lavo at shekavlu lahen scharan yud beis mana. And what happened? So same thing. So the Avatinas family says, no problem, you want us back? Double our salary. So again, some say they were making 12 mana, and therefore they doubled it to 24. Rabbi Huda Omer Chaf Dalit Hayu Notlin V'Noslin Lahen Memches. Others say that no, they were making 24 and they doubled it to 48. Okay, so they rehired. Again, Chazal approached them. Amar Lahen Mipnei Ma'inatem Rotzim Lalamid. Why don't you want to teach anyone about the Ketoras? Why won't you share this information? Amar Lahen, they said to the rabbis, Masores Si Biadenu Me'avosenu Shabayis Hazeh. Same thing. We have a Masorah. Avatinas family had the same Masorah as the Garmu family. That one day the Beis Hamikdash is going to be destroyed. And what's going to happen? If we go ahead and we give away the secret of the incense, what's going to happen? The Yosin, Shelo Yilamdu Achir, the Yosin came lifnei avodah zara. And I will say, by the way, you see an interesting thing. We know that in other religions, like Christianity, incense is a very big thing. Incense is a major part of the avodah, and not just Christianity, other religions as well. So it's actually very interesting that there's a carryover from these things. In any event, they did not want to go ahead and teach anyone about the secret of the Ketoras, out of fear that after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, it would be used for avodah zara. So what happens? B'dvarim halalu maskirin osin l'shvach. So the Gemara says l'shevach. So again, the Avatinas family was known for a very beautiful practice. Shelo yatzasa isha mishal echad mehen mevusemes mi'olam. The women of the Avatinas family never wore perfume. Why not? V'lo od elikisha hayu echad mehem. No se isha makom acher. Hayaposek ima almanas shelo tispasim. Not only that, not only did the Avatinas women not wear perfume, but when an Avatinas son married a woman from another family, it was on the condition that she agreed that she was never going to wear perfume. Why? Shelo yuhu omrim mima'as pitum haketoras hem misbasmos. In order that no one should ever say that the Avatinas family is using the ketoras for their own personal use. It's amazing. And I will say, you have to understand something. So you say to yourself, what's the big deal? In Talmudic times where hygienic standards were very different, people weren't necessarily bathing every day, perfume was actually very important because perfume often masked odor. So to give up the use of perfume is not such a pasha thing. It means you probably have to bathe more often. So it's a big thing. So the Gemara says the following: the Kaim Ashenemar, this comes to uphold that which we said before. V'yisem nekiyim me Hashem umi Yisrael. We'll say we see from here that what? That a person has an obligation to be nucky. A person has an obligation to live life beyond reproach. Even though, again, the Garmu family could have eaten white bread, and the Avatina family could have worn perfume, they wanted to remain above even the specter of suspicion. Slimar goes weiter. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yossi says, one time I was in Yerushalayim, and I was with a child from the house of Avatinos, the Avatinos family. Avatinos is the Ktoras. So what happens? Amrlo bini me'ize mishpacha ato. So I said to my son, which family are you from? Amrli mishpachas ploni. He said, I'm from the Avatinos family. Amarti lo, I said to him, bini avosecha lefishin is kavnu l'rabos kavodan uluma'id kavod shamayim. Because your family had in mind to amplify their own kavod and to minimize the kavod of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, lefichach kavodam nisma'id ukivod shamayim nisraba. Therefore, your family has fallen into obscurity, but yet the kavod of Hashem has magnified. So Rabbi Yossi was giving him some pretty strong musar, essentially saying what your family did was really inappropriate. So Rabbi Yossi, also you see from here that apparently even though these families had reasons, let's say Avatina's family had a reason not to share the recipe for the Ketoros, apparently Chazal did not feel that was a real reason. They should have still shared it. And therefore, again, you see Rabbi Yossi expressing this displeasure with the family, even to this young child. Rabbi Akiva, Sochli Shimon ben Luga. Shimon ben Luga told me the following story. One time I was collecting herbs with one of the young children of the house of Avatinas. Okay, and what happens? V'ra'isi oso shebacha, v'ra'isi oso shesachak. And I saw that he cried, and then I saw that he laughed. Amarti lo b'ni, lama b'chisa. I said to my son, why are you crying? Amar li al kavod beis abba shenismait. He says, I cry over my family that has fallen into obscurity. Also remember, Rabbi Akiva is telling the story. This is post-destruction of the second temple, which also, by the way, is very helpful for understanding that when the house of Garmu and the house of Avatinas did not want to share these secrets, because the Beis Hamikdash was going to be destroyed, what they were also saying was, as opposed to the first Beis Hamikdash, where the Navi already told us that there was a defined cap for exile. There was 70 years. We were told that in advance. We were going to be out of Eretz Yisrael for 70 years. The second Korban, of course, has no cap. For Haraya, we're still here. That's why, again, the Garmu family, the Avatinas family, had this real concern about these secrets falling into the hands of the Avodah Zarah. So this young child cries over the lost glory of his family. V'lama sachakta, and why did you laugh? Amrali ala kavod hamatukan letzadikim la'asad lavo. So he says, I laughed over the kavod that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has in store for the tzadikim for the future. Take a look at the Tikkun Charatin. I'll both say about 7 lines after the bottom of Tikkun Charatin. Hamatukan letzadikim la'asad lavo. V'hainu she'asel HaKadosh Baruch Hu lahachzir lanu. So we'll say, so the young child was again, this is post-Churban, post-destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. So he's crying for the lost glory of his family, he's crying for the lost glory of the Jewish people, but he laughs because he knows that one day that glory will be restored. Umara Isa, what did you see when you were collecting herbs in the field? See, he says, Mara Isa, Ma'ala Ashan Lenegdi. So the young child said, I saw the herb Ma'ala Ashan. And also remember, what's the herb Ma'ala Ashan? That's the one ingredient of the Ketores that allows the column, the pillar of smoke, to extend upwards. Say, Ma'ala Ashan, no misilo b'ni herehuli. So Shimon ben Luga says to the child, no, show me, tell me what it is. Amar li Rebbe misores biyadi me'avosai. So the young child says, Shimon ben Luga, I have a Mesorah from my forefathers. Shalo lahar oso libraihu. not to share it, not to show it to anyone else. So we'll say, amazingly enough, the house of Avatinas still kept this Mesorah even in the aftermath of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri said, "Pagabi zakan echad mishal beis Avatinas." One time, an elder member of the Avatinas family came to me. Umegilas samanim miado, and there was a scroll of herbs in his hand. So we'll say what he was holding was the ingredient scroll. He was holding the ingredient scroll for ketores. Amarli, and he said to me, Rebbe, l'sha'avra haya beis abin tzinuin. In the past, the members of my household were tzinuin. Tzinuin means very private. And what happens? V'hayu mosrines hamegillah hazos elu li elu. And they would only go ahead and share this scroll, one with the other. V'achshav she'enan beis abba ne'emanin. And now that the members of my family are no longer trustworthy. So I will say, interestingly enough, what the Gemara seems to be saying over here is that even in the aftermath of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, is that the Avatinas family became compromised as well. And there was a concern now that what? That they were going to be the ones who would share it with other people. Helechas HaMegillah, Rebbe, please, you take the Megillah, you take the scroll, v'hi zoher ba, and please be careful with it. So at some point in time, the Gemara says that the Beis Avatinas family actually handed over the recipe to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. So the Gemara says, "Ukishabasi v'hertzesi hadvar l'fnei Rabbi Akiva." And Rabbi Yochanan, listen to how beautiful this is. When I came and I told Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says, when I came and told over what just happened to Rabbi Akiva, Zilgu einav demaos, his eyes filled with tears, and he said, "Va'amar me'ata ein anu tzrichin lahaskiran lignai." Now we no longer have to remember the Avatinas family in a disparaging factor. So also again, what he's quoting over here is the Mishnah Maseches Yoma discusses that the Beis Avatinas family were looked down upon by Chazal because they would not share this recipe. So Rabbi Akiva says, finally, the mistake of the Avatinas family has been rectified. We no longer have to look down on this particular family. It's amazing. So Gemara says, Elazar ala parochas. So the Mishnah said that Elazar was in charge of the curtains, the upkeep of the curtains. Shaymamuna al arge parochas. He was in charge of the weavers for the what did I just call it? Curtain. Thank you for the curtain. So the Gemara says Pinchas hamalbish. Pinchas was in charge of Kohanic wardrobe. Also, as I pointed out yesterday, especially for the Kohen Gadol, there are many vestments which the Kohen Gadol can't put on himself. He needs help. So apparently, again, Pinchas was the helper. So Shahaya Mabish Bigdei Kahuna Gidola, that he was the one who would help the Kohen Gadol get dressed. Ma'aseh b'Kohen Hechad Shehelbish Leistrachios Aleph Echad V'Nos La Shmona Zehuvim. So there was a story. The Gemara just tells us a random story that there was once a Kohen who helped one of the officers. So this must be one of the Roman officers. One of the Roman officers get dressed. So he was like the attendant of one of the Roman officers. And what happened? And the officer gave him 8 gold pieces. And others say no, he gave him 12 gold pieces. I will say, what's the point of this? The point of this is good help is hard to find. Right? So therefore, again, if you have someone who's able to help you with your clothing, it's a big to-do. So the Gemara just brings that anecdote, just by saying this is a service that is very valuable. So obviously, it was valuable in the Beis HaMikdash as well for Pinchas to help with the Kohen Gadol with this. Says the Mishnah, Ein pochasin mishiva amarkulin. Or amarkulin. We don't now. We'll say the Mishnah is going to continue to go through the structure of the Beis HaMikdash, who was in charge of us. And now we're being introduced to a new office called the Amarkulin. Now I will say Amarkulin are people who are on top of the Gizbarin. On top of the Gizbarin. So if you take a look, actually, it's so what we have. So Amarkulin, by the way, is a contraction for Amar Kulan. Amar Kulan. These are the people who decide everything. So we don't have less than 7 Amarkulin in the Beis HaMikdash. Ushlosha Gizbarin, and 3 Gizbarin. So a Gizbar we normally translate it as treasurer. So Amarkulin are the bosses; those are the guys who are in charge of everything. The Gizbarin are their employees, the ones who ultimately carry out the tasks. The in osin strara ala tzibur pachos mishnayim. And I will say, in general, whenever you have some type of financial office for the Jewish people, you never want to have less than 2 people heading up that office. Now, what they're saying over here is, whenever it comes to money, you need a system of checks and balances. So you don't want to have just one person who has the checkbook without anyone else seeing it. So in any financial offices in the Beis Hamikdash, you usually had at least two or more people managing that process, with a couple of exceptions. Chutz mi ben Achia shal chol me'ayim, with the exception of Ben Achia, who, again, we saw before, was in charge of the Kohanim's stomach issues. And we'll say, now obviously, why is that a financial office? Well, that is a financial office because it means he had money with which to purchase different types of wine. So apparently, Achia had that checkbook on his own, and Elazar shal paroches, and Elazar had the checkbook for the curtain repairs also on his own. Why were these two individuals different? Sha'osan kiblu rovat tzibur aleim, because these individuals were trusted by the entire populace. What the Mishnah seems to be saying over here is, listen, if someone's not as well known, so the Maisa, good standard operating procedures is make sure you have your system of checks and balances. Don't let the checkbook be in the hands of any one individual. Have at least two individuals who see the books, with one exception, which is if someone is well known and trusted by everyone, then einachinami, if the public vests them with that trust and responsibility, then one person could even manage the finances. Says the Gemara, in pochasin migimol gizbarin umizayin amarkulin. You can't have less than 3 gizbarin and 7 amarkulin. So the Gemara says, Tani, mishnei katlikin. So we'll say now there's another office over here, and you also need 2 katlikin. So take a look at the Tikkun Chalatin for just a moment. See, he says, Tana, Braisa Musefes Shein Pochsem Mibeis Memunam Lamal Mina Amarkon. So we'll say now we have this new position called Katlikin. So again, if you're looking at the temple flow chart, what you have is the Katlikin, the Amarkolin, and the Gizbarin. And then really under the Gizbarin, by the way, are all of these individual offices. Like you've seen before, all these individuals who are responsible for different things. So the Gemara says, now, based on what we just said before, you wouldn't have less than 2 Katlikin. So again, these Katlikin are on the top of the we'll see actually, the real organizational flow chart is, it goes Melech, we'll see this later on, Melech, Kohen Gadol, Sgan Kohen Gadol, then we'll see there might be a position even there on the Sgan Kohen Gadol, Katlikin, Gizbarin, and then individual offices. Katlikin are officers. I don't know if it's not a good English word for it. They're officers. They're officers, but they're above the Amarkolin. So again, I don't know if there's a real. Does the article give a? Does the article give an English word for that? Overseers. Okay, but that's what Amarkolin means also. But all right, fine. So I guess this is it. Controllers. Okay, good. All right. So again, I don't know. I would tell you pay more attention to the hierarchy. Don't worry as much as about the translation of the words. But Katlikin is the boss. Although we'll see he's not really the boss either. But again, the point that the Mishnah is trying to establish over here is the hierarchy. Katlikin, Amarkolin, Gizbarin, individuals. So the Gemara just quotes now a couple of psukim from Divrei Hayamim, where the Navi quotes a number of different names, and these names refer to different people in these positions. Sahadu diksiv v'Yechiel v'Azayahu v'Nachas v'Asohel v'Yirmius v'Yozavad v'Aliel v'Yismachyahu umachos ubenayahu. So stop there for just a moment. This all refers to Amarkolin. All these individuals were Amarkolin. They occupy the position of Amarkolin. Pekidim miyad konyahu v'shimi achyu katlikin. These individuals were the katlikin. B'mifkad Yechizkiyahu, and they were in the charge of Yechizkiyahu Hamelech. They were in charge. They were all worked for Yechizkiyahu the king. Va'azaryahu Nigid Beis Elokim, and Azaryahu the prince of the house of God, which refers to Hamelech va'Kohen Gadol. So we'll say here again, the Navi helps a little bit more, that above the Katlikin was the Kohen Gadol, and above the Kohen Gadol was the Melech. Kishu Chosim, I will say this is actually very interesting as well. Now remember, we spoke about the fact that there would often be surplus funds. Surplus funds now had to be locked away. When they were locked away, they were sealed up. And now in order to ensure that no money would be taken, they were sealed with multiple seals. So what would happen? Kishu Chosim, Hagozer Hagizbar Chosim, so when the baskets were sealed up, so what would happen? The first person who would seal up would be the gozer, would be the gizbar. The gizbar. You call him the treasurer. So the Gizbar would seal it up, and then he would give it to the Amarkal. So the Amarkal would seal it up. Amarkal chosim, he'd put a seal and put his own signature on it. And what would happen? V'nosan lekatlikon, and he'd give it to the Katlikon. Katlikon chosim, the Katlikon would seal it, his seal, and what would happen? V'nosan lekohen gadol, he'd give it to the Kohen gadol. Kohen gadol chosim, the Kohen gadol would seal it. V'nosan lemelech, and he would give it to the king. Ukeshematir, and Rabbi said, first of all, you just understand this amazing system. So remember, this is multiple seals. So now what happens? When you want to go ahead and withdraw money from that basket, what do you have to do? They first take it to the king. Ukeshematir, hamelech rocho somatir, the king looks at his seal, make sure that it's his seal, and then what? And then they open it. They take it to the Kohen gadol. Kohen gadol rochosmo umatir. Kohen gadol sees his seal and then breaks it, opens it. Katlikin rochosmo, the Katlikin sees his seal, opens it. Amarkal rochosmo umatir, the Amarkal sees his seal and he opens it. Gizbar rochosmo, the Gizbar then sees his seal, opens it, and now the money is accessible. So I'll say again, quite a system of checks and balances. Ein osin srara ala tzibur mamon pagos mishnayim. Whenever it comes to money, right, authority that deals with money, we try to have at least two people overseeing that. Rav Nachman b'shem Rabbi Mana Hashem vehem yikchu es hazah. So I'll say, interestingly enough, Rav Nachman says in the name of Rabbi Mana that there's actually a scriptural allusion to this, because the Torah says by the Mishkan, it says vehem yikchu es hazah. They will take the gold. This is referring to the collection. The people would bring the gold, the silver, all the different materials, and they would take the money. The fact that the Torah says they, plural, indicates that what? That whenever dealing with money, always good to have two people in charge, and therefore, again, they could serve kind of as a check on the other. Obviously, I will say, it goes without saying that anytime a person wants to cheat, you could cheat, right? If you want to beat the system, you could beat the system. But at the end of the day, we assume that people are honest, but but people are always even more honest when what? When they know that someone else is looking. Therefore, again, even in the Mishkan, they made sure that when looking at the stuff that was collected, there were two people. That becomes the model going forward. So the Gemara goes weiter. Amar Rabbi Chama Bei Rabbi Chanina. Mipsula shaluchos he'eshir Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu became wealthy because of the leftovers of the luchos. Rabbi again, so the luchos were made from precious stones. And Moshe Rabbeinu, Kadosh Baruch Hu gave him the chiselings, if that's the right term, the chiselings of the stones. So he got this shrine, he got the leftover of the stones, and that's how Moshe Rabbeinu became exceptionally wealthy. So you'll ask yourself, why exactly does Moshe Rabbeinu need wealth? After all, again, so remember, we saw this earlier, same reason why the Kohen Gadol needed wealth, because wealth commands respect. And to be a leader, you have to have the respect of the people. So some people will respect you for your knowledge, some people will respect you for your courage, but most people will respect you because of your wealth. So it's important, even for Moshe Rabbeinu, who was in the desert, to ultimately be wealthy. But again, he has no outside career, he has no outside parnasa. So where does he become wealthy from? So the Rabbi Chama says he became wealthy because he got the chiselings, right? The what? The shavings. Good. The shavings of the luchos. That's how he became rich. So the Gemara says, listen to this. So the Hadad hu dichsiv psal lecha shnei luchos avanim. Because what does the pasuk say? Rabbi says it's actually interesting because the Torah says literally hew out or carve out for yourself two tablets. Psal lecha. What does it mean? What does it mean? Carve out for yourself. Shetea psoles shalcha. The shavings will be yours. Amr Chanin machzav shalavanim tovos umargolios barla kadosh baruch hu mitocho alo. Others say no. Rabbi Chanin says no. You know what happened? Amazing miracle. Moshe Rabbeinu in his tent, Hakadosh Baruch Hu carved out for him literally a machzav, a quarry of precious stones in his tent. In other words, that Moshe Rabbeinu had found out that the place where he pitched his tent was mamish right on top of a gold deposit. Okay, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu made him rich like that. The point I'll say is the same idea, which is that Moshe Rabbeinu became rich because of miraculous intervention. But we'll say, listen to this. However, ksiv v'hibitu acharei Moshe ad ba'oha ohala. So we'll say the Torah says that the people would often look at Moshe Rabbeinu from behind as he went to his tent. So train Amorayin. So we'll say there's two different opinions as to how to understand this pasuk. Chad Amar Lignai, v'chad Amar L'Shvach. One says that this pasuk was disparaging, and one says that it was a compliment. How so? So the Gemara says, "Man ta'amar lignai." So the one who says lignai will say, "This is going to blow your mind." That Moshe Rabbeinu would be walking towards his tent. People would see him from behind. And what would they say? Chamun shakin. Look how fat his thighs are. Chamun karin. Look how fat his legs are. Chamun kupad. Right? Look how fat Moshe Rabbeinu is getting. Achil min diudai. In other words, they would say Moshe is gaining weight. You know why he's gaining weight? Because he's eating off our backs. That they would literally disparage Moshe Rabbeinu, and they would accuse Moshe Rabbeinu. Ultimately, just so you should know, that's why Moshe Rabbeinu does multiple accountings of the monies collected for the Mishkan in front of the people, because he knew that there were those who thought that he was skimming off the top. So if Moshe Rabbeinu put on a few pounds, what happens? Mamish, people began to talk. It wasn't because of the stress of the job, right? He was putting on a few pounds because he must have been stealing from them. Just amazing. It's Moshe Rabbeinu. And the other says no, that you can interpret this pasuk positively. He says, I'm sorry. Madam L'Shvach, Machame Tzadiki Umezaki Tuvia Tizakis Lemech Meyaseh. Look at this incredible tzaddik. Look at his righteousness and how fortunate we are to look at him. That the people felt they were fortunate just to be able to lay eyes upon Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay, says the Mishnah. And it will say, by the way, who's right? Who's right? Both right? There were some people, again, who ultimately disparaged Moshe Rabbeinu, and there were some people who felt that they had the privilege to be in the midst of a great tzaddik. Mishnah, Dalit Chosamos Hayu B'Mikdash. There were 4 seals in the Beis HaMikdash. 4 tokens. This is what we talked about before, these tokens. So what does this mean? V'kasav alein, what was written on the tokens, and we'll discuss how they were used in just a moment. V'kasav alein, Egel, a calf. Zachar also means a ram. Gedi is a kid. V'chote, and sinner. Now, don't worry, if you drew the sinner token, it didn't. So we'll discuss what that means. Ben Azai says, no, actually, there were 5 tokens. 5 hayu, va'aramis kasuban. There wasn't Hebrew writing on them, there was Aramaic on them. What did it say? Egel. All right, Egel, because Egel is the same in Hebrew and Aramaic. Calf. Dachar. Dachar, I will say in Aramaic, is Zochar. Remember, in Aramaic, the Dalet and the Zayin are interchangeable. That refers to a ram. Gedi, kid. Chote dal, v'chote ashir. A poor sinner and a rich sinner. So we'll say now the Gemara says, what were these tokens for? These were nesachim tokens. These were tokens for libations. Egel, what does it mean if you bought yourself an Egel token? Mishamesh im nische bakar gidolim ukitanim. Zechar munekevos. If you were bringing a carbon that came from a cow, came from a calf, whether big or small, male or female, you had to bring a nesech, a libation along with that. So we'll see that token represented your libation. We'll see what you did with it in just a moment. Gedi, if you had the Gedi token, mishamesh im nichse atzon gidolim ukitanim zechar munekevos. That means if you were bringing a carbon that was being brought from a kid, from sheep, whether large or small, male or female, you had that token. Chutz mishal elim, with the exception of a ram. Ayil, if you had the token for an ayil, for a ram, mishamesh im nische elim, bilvad. Chote, mishamesh im nische shalosh behemos shal mitzora. So we'll say, what happens if you had, what was the chote, what was the sinner token? The sinner token was that you were a mitzora, and you had to bring your libations along with your karbanah. So we'll say, what was the process? Listen to this. So we'll say, now I come to the Beis HaMikdash. So what happens? I have to bring a nesach. So again, remember, you have options. You could bring your own, but apparently it must have been very common that people bought at the Beis HaMikdash stuff. So what was the process for buying? So if you need an nesachim, holech eitzel Yochanan, shehu memuna ala chosamos. So what happens? You would go to Yochanan, and what would you go? Yochanan was in charge of the tokens. The no say no maos. So listen to this process. You'd go to Yochanan, and Yochanan, you would happily say, listen, I need a nesach for my ram. And what happens? You would give him 100 shekel, and he would give you the token. And the token said on it, ayil, said on it ram, or zocher. So what did you do? And what happens? Then you took your token and you went to Achia. Now he's in charge of the Nesachim. What did you do? You gave him your token. So you go to Achia, you'd give him your token, and what would he give you? He'll give you whatever you needed, your wine, your oil, your flour, whatever your libation was. La Erev, in the evening, Ba'in Ze'etzel Zeh. So Shimon Yochanan, who was in charge of the tokens, and Achia, who was in charge of the Nisachim, got together. So also remember, Yochanan has money, Achia has tokens. So what do they do at the end of the day? So Achia would go ahead and take out the tokens, and Shimon had to match up cash with each of the tokens. So what happens? In Pichsu lo. If it turns out that Yochanan is short on cash, let's say there are more tokens than cash, then what? Then Yochanan is responsible to make up the shortfall. Because obviously then that's a mistake on his part. Something happened. He is responsible for the shortfall. The Yishalim Yochanan mi beiso. Yochanan is personally responsible to make up the shortfall. Vimo siru. But what happens if there are more tokens? What happens if there was more money than tokens? Then hosiru lahekdish. Then what happens? Because we'll say how could that happen? That could happen. Let's say somebody for whatever reason didn't cash in their token. They bought it because also we'll see tokens were only redeemable that day. So whatever, they went home, they had a family emergency, whatever the Metzias is. Beis Hamikdash keeps the extra money. Shiyad hektish al ha'elyona, because the Beis Hamikdash always has the upper hand. Misha avot chosamo. Let's say somebody lost their token. So we'll say, right, what happens? You go ahead, you went to Yochanan, you paid for your token, and then you lose your token. So you go to Beis Hamikdash customer service, right? So Beis Hamikdash customer service says, well, I'm sorry, you're going to have to wait until the evening. Why? Because what would happen? Mamtino ada erev. Imatsu lo kedei chosamo. No, so we'll say, if I really lost my token, then what should happen? There should be extra cash. That means there should be at least one more unit of cash more than the tokens. So what happens? In Matsu lo kedei chosamo. So if it turns out that that Yochanan has extra cash, then they'll refund me. Whatever they'll do. Either they'll let me cash in my token the next day, or they'll go ahead and refund me my cash. And if not, lo hayu nostin lo. So we'll say at the end of the day, if the accounting doesn't work out, I'm sorry, the Beis Midrash is saying not that we don't believe you, but we're not giving you back anything. V'shem hayom kasuv alehen mimnei aramon. And I will say what they would do is they would write the date on the token. So the tokens were only usable on that particular day. Why mimnei aramon? Because of the people who were dishonest. Meaning I will say it could happen that over time tokens are lost, or people perhaps get, or whatever the Metzias is, in order to cut down on people's ability to misuse the token. The tokens were dated and were only effective for that particular day. All right, we'll stop over here. Shkoyach.